Hello and welcome to my presentation on how Holland Barrett are using geospatial techniques to build a network plan and shape their post-COVID store estate. Before I get into the detail, just a bit of background about the pack and project. The project itself was to internalise our store network plan, which provides an action and investment strategy for the UK and Ireland. I've omitted some of our trading secrets, but aim to provide a blueprint to what was done during the project. The project team itself was just two people. It was our lead data scientist and me performing the analysis. Because of this, I've put a little background about myself on the right-hand side. Whilst I've listed out some of the key tools, most of the project was done within our data science stack using Python. Developing a plan was critical to the project's success. We focused upon controllable elements so that we had something actionable on the outside. The real problem that we faced was that most third parties did not put together a post-COVID forecast that we thought was accurate. This is problematic for functions like ours. Therefore, we decided to build a number of models and scenarios that covered our customer behaviour and how that affected our stores and digital performance. It's important for us here to acknowledge that potentially one trend is affecting the other. This moves on to the trends that we have seen, and hopefully none of this is a surprise to us because we've been living through it all after all. I think that the key things for us to identify here were the trends that were affecting our store network and understanding whether they were short or long term and how it would affect their recovery. It's also important for me to point out on this slide that both the digital data and the Google movement data are market level and not reflective of our store performance, or maybe they are. I've just decided to omit them. So what we really acknowledge here is that different locations will be affected disproportionately, and that will affect our store recovery. And it's not just store level trends that are affecting stores, but things like digital acceleration will affect how we can perform in the future. Initially, I wrote this presentation and I hadn't specifically mentioned the geographic aspect to this project. However, we do admit that it's an inherently geographic problem. So we looked at our data in multiple ways. The main thing to point out is that we looked both at an individual store level and whether it was profitable to operate that store, or whether deflection rates and things like that would affect the efficiency of our decisions. Secondly, we looked at stores at a retail centre level. That allowed us to benchmark locations and look at where we were over and underperforming. So we took a lot of customer data, a lot of market data, and analysed it at both levels to come out with our final answers. One of the ways in which we tackled the problem was to look at clustering. So we ended up with 4 different clusters. The ones in blue had massive COVID declines. You can probably guess which they are from your own sales data, but these were really reliant upon workers and tourism, and particularly international tourism. So all the things that have really shut down and were reflective within that Google movement data. The second cluster, the one that I've highlighted in yellow there, had large COVID declines, but not to the extent seen in the blue cluster. These probably had a little more local demand, and that helped prop up store sales. The other two clusters, cluster 3 and 4, which are purple and green, showed very similar store level effects. There were small levels of decline, and in fact some were positive. So with that pattern of localization, there were winners and losers. What we did find though was a difference in their digital performance. So again, that second trend of digital acceleration. What we found was that those in the green in cluster 4 had low digital participation in the first place, and that they'd kind of caught up to the average alongside the purple. So in these locations, we think that that online transfer is going to be a bit stickier and may affect our stores. That's not to say that it's a bad thing for Holland Barrett or for any of us as retailers, but it just means that customers may choose to interact with us in a different way. We use these 4 scenarios or 4 clusters to project potential rates for decline or recovery onto stores, and they did differ depending on the hypotheses that we generated. So this store gives a little more detail into how the stores were clustered. It was done on a per store level. We did initially look at many options, and we decided that the multi-channel behavioural change of our customers was the most telling and would potentially be reflective of how stores might recover. So it's as much customer modelling as it is store modelling. It's just that it's grouped into stores for their effect. The word might that I used is the crucial part of that sentence. So actually, just to go back and to clarify here, the scales that are on the graph I have manually adjusted just to protect that sensitive data again. So whilst it is reflective, there are some changes in there, and I thought it's best to point it out at this stage. So moving back to this slide on the scenarios. The word might is indeed crucial. In all honesty, we can't say with any degree of accuracy what will happen. So what we did instead was model multiple scenarios per market. So you can see that we did 6 for the UK and 5 for Republic of Ireland. When looking at our store data and our store performance, we noticed some different trends. Therefore, we decided to do different models. It did increase our workload, but we felt it was well worth it. What we did to meet this problem that we couldn't be entirely accurate was we actually ran a whole range of scenarios, some from the worst possible that we thought would happen, and some from the best, as well as that variable change, which we used the store segmentation to detail. So we had our preferred and what we thought might happen, but what we were really interested in was the difference between the extremes, and it allowed us to target our energy on those that had differing outcomes. It could well have been that running the 2 extremes, everything's the same, and it would increase our confidence in the property decisions that we make in the future. For the vast majority, they didn't really change that much. Again, we could be confident in those and focus on the ones where it did change. So we could use specific processes afterwards where we looked at things like negotiated rental deals, what deal we would need to keep it open, and our asset management team could go out and try and negotiate that deal or get better. And therefore, saying whether something is an exit or a retain may change depending on the results of that negotiation. The key things that we wanted to test during the scenario is firstly the duration of COVID effects on stores. So we called something mild COVID, which was kind of last year's summertime when there was a bit more freedom to go out and shop. We carried that on for a duration of 1 and 2 financial years. There are financial years and not necessarily April to March. Then we also looked at the degree of recovery. So that's where your kind of weak and strong change, as well as the variable change, come in. And as I've mentioned, we've compared them all together to focus our attention on the stores that need it the most. So then that leads us nicely to our classifications. So what you can see, we developed an action classification that is around our estates management. We have an element of new, which I'll go on to in a later slide. There's a large number of retained stores. They're the ones that we want to keep. An exit is also fairly self-explanatory. It's stores that, without significant renegotiation, we will be exiting. And unfortunately, under COVID, that's kind of a fact that there will be some. Then we've also got consolidation stores. These are a little like the exit stores, but we feel we can potentially consolidate 2 stores into one. And that's either by just closing one store and transferring trade across, or closing both stores and having one better store in the location. So particularly in city centres, we'd rather have our best offer in the best place for our customers than have something a bit disjointed. Next up, there's an optimization category, and this is mainly things like relocations, but there's also downsizes and other elements that are in our control that we could do when leases or investment periods are up. Finally, there's something called a milk category. These are stores that currently make profit, but we don't think they will for the foreseeable future. The idea with these is to invest as little as possible, keep our rental deals flexible, and generate profit. And once they stop generating profit, we'll take the decision to leave. Obviously, all of these action classifications are a little down to the negotiations that we do. So in some cases, we've had exit stores or milk stores that we've talked to our landlords and we've got some great deals. They've been really proactive and happy to work with us. So we've gone ahead and changed our decision. We have this process underneath that looks at every single one in isolation, as well as the initial classification. The classification just provides some information. Secondly, we have our investment classification. This ranks our stores using market potential and compares to benchmarks to look at return on investment. So over the next slide, I've got a photo of, here we are. We have a photo of one store where we've done some investment. This is actually Hemel Hempstead, and we've got our new format there, our best format. You can see the massive changes that we've done, and we've only been able to do it because we think we will get a return from doing it, or there's a benefit to our customers. Finally, we look at this new store angle. We talk about something called white space, which is effectively a list of locations that we can open a store with limited impact upon our existing estate. This gets much tougher as you get a more mature and saturated market or store presence. With 800 in the UK, it's quite difficult now for us to find a town of a decent size that we're not already within. So to do this, we generate something called headroom. We effectively take our market size, take away our retail centre sales and compare it to a benchmark, and that builds a headroom value. So we're not saying that we can take 100% of the market potential. We compare it to a town of a similar size or a retail centre of a similar behaviour and size, and say, what do we think is realistic? This brings us a bit of a target list up, and we then use a separate process in our acquisitions to see whether there's actually a unit on that location, whether it be a retail park, shopping centre or high street. We look to see whether there's the right type of unit there, whether the prices there are affordable based upon our sales projections, and ultimately whether we think we've got the right format to access that market. If you know Holland Barrett, a lot of our stores are very similar, and therefore will that generate the returns that we would like? On the right hand side is just a bit of market information, just to show that we do look at it in a geographical way, and we do look by kind of store types and things like that. And the footfall change is just what's happened over the COVID period, where initially we've seen retail parks more resilient. It'd be interesting to see whether they are the ones that recover quicker, or whether other ones make up the difference that they've lost. So that ends really what I've come to show you today. I hope you found it useful, and we'll move on to questions. Thank you.
Great. Well, James, thank you so much for joining us live for the Q&A here. Really interesting to hear about the journey of Holland Barrett throughout the pandemic. I'm pretty sure we'll have some questions coming in the chat any second now. One question I wanted to start with is, when you talk about the reformatting of certain sites where you believe that's going to have a bigger impact, do you consider any geospatial data there which considers like this segment of people, the new branding might resonate more with them? Or how's that calculated?
Yeah, we're in kind of a testing phase for that, really. So we did originally just look at certain demographic angles where we thought, for our initial test, where we thought it would happen. And then we're now looking at doing a certain number of stores that fit a certain demographic criteria, as well as our operational criteria, to see if we can kind of learn anything. So it's all about kind of having a focused test and then being able to learn things from it. So it was an initial consideration within the program that we're doing, and some of it, to be honest, is as simple as lease events as well. So certain other kind of property deals that may trigger some investment, and we've decided to lead with our new format or an element of the new format to test whether the format works in certain location types, and B, kind of turning bits off and on to say, we think this element of the format is worth this amount of money to us, and that element is worth another amount.
Right. When you have those kinds of conversations within the business, you're obviously in location planning. Who else sits around those tables for those decisions? So you've got real estate, marketeers involved. Just curious to understand how you interact with other departments.
Yeah, exactly. There's a number of departments that we work quite closely with. So obviously a lot of the customer targeting, we work with our insights department. We're kind of aligned. So I do my own kind of geodemographic analysis, but we try and align it to what they're saying. And we have kind of monthly customer feedback sessions. So there is that kind of regular drumbeat through the business around what's happening during COVID. Obviously, the retailers have a massive say there, as well do the property team. I sit within there, so it's quite direct, and we're very closely aligned to retail. We actually have one strategic person who sits kind of separate that does a lot of the management of the work stream. So it is a bit of a of a chain of I'll do my piece of work and I know it will affect the other person. We're talking, but there's a bit of a baton pass along the line that is managed by one person. So we're trying to do it as streamlined as we can.
Brilliant. Cool. We have a question from Nick Wetherall, who would like to ask what kind of external data sets and sources are most useful to your analysis?
Yeah, I don't know what names I can mention and things like that, but obviously the biggest part for us, as well as our own internal data sets, so kind of how our stores are performing sales and digital, as well as our reward for life customer data. We've been getting that enriched with geodemographic profiling, so we know who our key target customers are, and we know how many of them are within our store catchment areas, which we also generate from our own customer data, as well as taking some kind of off-the-shelf modelled catchments at a retail centre level. So when I talk about the two levels, there's the store level, which we've done measured with our own data, so we know things very specific to each individual store. And then we use kind of an off-the-shelf product for the retail centre catchments. The other thing that's quite useful is kind of the market data that's out there, because we're not like in the grocery sector where it's either heavily regulated or there's kind of reporting of sales. It's quite difficult to get an accurate read on what's happening in vitamins or happening in sports nutrition or something like that. So it's been really about partnering with the right providers to get something that we think is accurate, and then trying to drill down and get it at a regional level. So we'll know kind of UK level quite well, but actually going, what's the market around a specific store, it is quite difficult to get hold of. And there's been a lot of backwards and forwards around what's the right way to do it, what's the right way to model it, or if the case is we can't do exactly what we'd like, what would be the best with what we've got.
Absolutely. Very interesting. Thank you so much, James. I've got another question here from Connor Reed. He says, I loved your idea of an unsupervised model to capture the variation in COVID's impact on stores. How did you arrive at an optimal K in your clustering method, i.e. elbow method, gap statistics, etc.?
I don't entirely know, to be honest. So I didn't do that part of it. So there were kind of two of us that did the project. So it was a fairly nimble team, but it was more or less myself briefing the project and doing a lot of the storytelling and kind of the relationship management around the business. Then our lead data scientist did a lot of the detail. I kind of got it to the level that you see in the presentation where you see the detail there, and then kind of let him do the absolute detail. But it's something that I can get back to you on if you want to contact me after this.
Great. James, the data scientists that you have within the business at Holland Barrett, do the most of them come from a retail background previous to joining the company, or is it a mixture?
It's a real mixture, to be honest. It's more about finding the right candidate, and then we can teach them things. So, for instance, in property, there's a lot of things that happen that you have to be kind of in the property world to know about. That the data's always changing. There's deals to be done. That, say, a historic lease date doesn't mean that you've lost the store. It means that you're doing something called holding over, and it's going to keep going for month after month. So there's kind of industry specific knowledge, but we really employ them to do the statistical piece, and we can help with that background. And it really is a partnership between us. They're now working pretty much solely for me, and they're developing their property knowledge, and I'm sure they'll get there quicker than I'll learn kind of the cutting edge data science. But I can do a bit and he can do the very expert bit.
Great. And on the property specific stuff, turnover rents, something that people are talking a lot about in the industry. Is that something that you've come across or that you've had to model for?
Yeah, we have a few stores that are on turnover rents and potentially kind of top over turnovers. So based upon if we go above a certain threshold, which hopefully we do because it means success for both of us. But if we go over a certain threshold, then we'll be paying kind of extra for the unit. So yeah, it really does change case by case there, and because we've opened stores for quite a while, and because we've been essential retailer in the UK and Ireland, we kind of know kind of week to week what our sales are doing, rather than having to necessarily be too predictive.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I guess that you're looking forward to June kicking in and the restrictions being a little bit easier, or do you think that won't have too much of an impact on the business?
Yeah, I think it will do. I think just getting footfall back to the high street will be a brilliant boost for everyone. I mean, we have stayed trading, and I have kind of omitted the sales data that we do, but it's quite obvious to say, as kind of restrictions have stepped up, then kind of our store channels have stepped up along with it, to differing levels depending on how long we've been through the pandemic. So yeah, it really has varied, but we are looking forward to there being a bit more footfall and welcoming back some customers that have had to shield and shop online and things like that.
Absolutely. I think we're all looking forward to it, James. So thank you so much for joining us. If anybody wants to reach out to James, feel free to do so on the chat. Thanks for taking the time to prepare your presentation. Join us for the Q&A. It's actually a great segue into our next presentation. But James, thanks for joining us, and we'll be in touch.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.